We have lots to talk about in today's video, including a big Game 4 victory for the Edmonton Oilers to extend the Stanley Cup Final. Plus, we have other news around the NHL as well regarding the Toronto Maple Leafs coaching staff. We have trade rumors concerning the Ottawa Senators, as well as the Montreal Canadiens. Does it make sense for them to trade for Trevor Zegras? We'll talk about one Montreal media's opinion on what the appropriate response would be to a trade offer and what they should be willing to give up. Plus, could Patrick Kane end up in Toronto? We're going to discuss that possibility, as well as a UFA rumor concerning the Calgary Flames, and that's coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have lots to talk about today. First up, let's talk about Game 4 of the Stanley Cup Final. Last night was an absolute beatdown from the Edmonton Oilers over the Florida Panthers with a massive 8-1 victory. Not only did they stay alive, they just maybe gave themselves a chance for a comeback. I mean, obviously the Oilers themselves have to believe they can do it. Otherwise, there's no point continuing on. But not only did they come out last night and win the game, but they accomplished a lot of things that they were not able to do yet in this series. They scored 8 goals, which was more than the other 3 games combined. They chased Sergei Bobrovsky from the net. They got a power play goal, which is something that hadn't happened yet. At least some of their top 4 guys who were getting a lot of their goals finally get on the score sheet on the goal side of it. McDavid had his best game of the series by far. And it was just a massive win. Now, obviously, they still have a huge mountain to climb. They still have to win 3 games in a row. But at the same time, they now go to Florida for Game 5, feeling like they can do that. One key stat that we saw last night, which I guess we call kind of new, but kind of maybe forgotten about, was on 3 separate occasions this year, under Chris Knoblauch, after he was named the head coach of the Oilers had a 3-game losing streak. Well, they responded to get out of that funk in a big way each time. The first one, they went on an 8-game win streak after. The second time, they went on a 16-game win streak. And the last one resulted in a 5-game winning streak. This time, they need 4, which is lower than all of those. And if they can do that, they get the Stanley Cup. Now, mind you, it's a different type of game, different part of the season, a really good team. And obviously playing the same team every game, so there's going to be adjustments and, obviously back and forth strategy going back and forth. So, at the same time, it's not the easiest thing to do. It might sound easy in theory, but I guess with those kind of things going for them, they kind of feel good about themselves now. They go down to Florida. If they win Game 5 and force us to a Game 6 back at home like they just did last night, they're going to be putting a big seed of doubt in the Panthers' minds. Although the other statistic that is very, very common, I think it was the last 4 or 5 years, that the first opportunity for a team to clinch the Stanley Cup, they did not. A lot of times teams get up in that first chance they have to win it and become champions, many of which, not always, but a lot of times for the very first time in their careers or the first time in team history. It's rare that they get it done on the first try because there's so much pressure. And the Panthers laid an absolute egg for a game last night. They just did not play well. And to say that they probably wouldn't play that poorly again, we said the same thing in Game 1. Game 1 of the series, the Panthers had a poor game, but they found a way. Last night, it was not. Bobrovsky actually looked human. Got chased. I have to think his odds for the Conn Smythe just dropped drastically. To be honest, even if the Oilers don't come back and win, I really think there should be a really big consideration for McDavid for the Conn Smythe. He just broke Wayne Gretzky's record for the number of playoff assists in one playoff season at 32. That's pretty remarkable. To break a Wayne Gretzky record like that and have that number of points, especially after now giving up a bunch of goals and getting pulled last night, I got to think that the things have evened out here. Bobrovsky probably may not be the front runner anymore. He's a huge part of why they are where they are, but I think right now the most likely Panther player to win the Conn Smythe would be Barkov, who's also had a heck of a playoff run as well, a lot of which doesn't always show on the score sheet because a lot of it is defensive play. But at the end of the day, the Oilers got goals from their top guys. They got goals from their depth players. They had 2 goals from Holloway. You got goals from Henrique, McLeod, Janmark. Connor Brown was amazing, especially on the PK last night. Nugent Hopkins scored. Nurse got a big goal. That's going to make him feel better. He's had a really tough playoff. And, of course, McDavid scored and had multiple assists. So, at the same time, you still want to see better play, too. Like, I still think Bouchard and Draisaitl still didn't have great games. They were okay. They weren't bad, but they can certainly both play a lot better. And I do wonder, in the case of Bouchard especially, I kind of think some of those older guys might be running out of gas. He has played a ton of hockey, and it just catches up to you. It's just that's just natural. So we'll see what happens, but it certainly sets up a very interesting game number 5 on Tuesday night, back down in Sunrise. So we'll see if the Oilers can extend, or will the Panthers win the Stanley Cup on home ice, which I'm sure their fans would be thrilled to see. Some news and notes around the Toronto Maple Leafs. One, with Guy Boucher parting ways with the team as an assistant coach yesterday. Many feel now that's likely going to be the door that opens to allow Marc Savard to join the coaching staff. There was some talks a couple weeks back that when Craig Ruby was first hired, that Marc Savard very well could join him in Toronto. At the time, he was under contract with the Calgary Flames, who he had worked with as an assistant coach most recently, and then he had agreed with them to be released from the contract and parted ways with the Flames. So a lot of people thought, well, this is the precursor to him going to Toronto, but it's yet to happen. But at the same time, the main role that he would be expected to get would be the power play coach, and they already had that in Guy Boucher. So now that Boucher is gone, then you have to think that this is likely what Savard's been waiting for. This has probably been in the works for some time. Elliot Friedman talked this morning on his most recent 32 Thoughts podcast, saying that Guy Boucher wanted to be considered for the head coach once they determined there was going to be a coaching change and that Sheldon Keefe would not be returning. I know a lot of people thought when they hired Guy Boucher last year that as much as he might be a good addition as an assistant coach with all his experiences and everything, that he might also be an insurance piece on the staff for somebody that has a decent amount of head coaching experience should they need to make a change during the season. And maybe that was part of their rationale. Either way, it doesn't sound like he was given a lot of consideration for the head coaching job, or at the very least, if he didn't get too far with things. So it makes sense why they would end up parting ways. It's not really clear that they, I guess, kind of fired him, but it might be more mutual than we think, because obviously, you have to wonder how he'd be feeling about, already being there as an assistant coach, kind of waiting to see if there's going to be an opening as a head coach. Opening happens and he doesn't really get considered. Would he really want to stick around, or would he want to maybe go somewhere else where he might have a better shot at becoming a head coach again? So we'll see. Obviously, I think that's got to be his long-term goal, is to be a head coach in the NHL for a third time, whenever that happens down the road, if indeed he gets his opportunity. Another note, too, on a former assistant coach who recently left the organization with the Leafs, Dean Chynoweth. Sounds like, according to Elliot Friedman, he's likely going to end up with Scott Arniel on his staff with the Winnipeg Jets. Now, sticking with the Maple Leafs as well, is there any possibility, do people think there's a chance that they could land Patrick Kane as an unrestricted free agent? We do know that at this point he's yet to re-sign with his existing club in Detroit. All the intel we received at the end of the year, and nothing's really new has come out or changed in that regard, that it seemed unlikely that he was going back to Detroit. I think there was definitely mutual interest to bring him back. Sounded like he was very interested on his side. Not that Detroit didn't have any interest. I think the sticking point, from what we heard, was going to be term. He played very well there. Didn't even play a ton with DeBrincat. I don't think that, obviously, playing with his old Chicago teammate was something that he was looking forward to. DeBrincat, to me, didn't really have the greatest season in Detroit. He did not do any better than he did in Ottawa the year before. I still think that there's another gear he can find. But either way, Kane was real solid for them. They have a bunch of players that they need to make decisions on there, and it was believed that Yzerman was reluctant to give him the term that he was going to be looking for. And you could tell by Kane's end-of-season comments, it just sounded like he wasn't confident things were going to work out for him to stay. That's just my opinion. He didn't come out and obviously explicitly say that. But there hasn't really been a ton of talk about where he could end up. I did hear some rumblings about maybe the Dallas Stars. The Dallas Stars were very much in the mix, or at least believe they were, when he signed with Detroit. Obviously, there's his hometown in Buffalo. I think Kane really wants to be in a situation where he thinks they can be a solid playoff contender. I'm not sure how he feels about Buffalo. Clearly, they've missed for quite a few years now. Didn't miss by a lot the last couple of years. So, again, difficult to say. He joined Detroit with them being on a, outside looking in streak. I don't know. I know with Toronto, there's some rumblings because he does spend time there in Toronto. There's no doubt. And he was recently spotted. There's a photo of him with Max Domi and Ty Domi at a restaurant. Looks like they're having dinner or something. And it's got people kind of talking a little bit. So clearly, we don't know what's happening with Domi, Bertuzzi. Clearly, if he's talking to Domi himself must be confident, about going back. Doesn't mean that they're talking about the Leafs. They could be talking about something completely different. Just because two NHL players are having a social gathering of some sort doesn't mean they're having recruitment talks or anything like that. It could be completely different. But just what people are like when they see something like that, it just kind of gets the wheels turning and gets the ideas flowing, and we'll see what happens. And then at the end of the day, he is a free agent. Now, of course, the Leafs very well could benefit from his play. He's been really good for Detroit since he had his surgery. He looks like he's a whole new rejuvenated player. There was some wondering about the Leafs in the first place when he was first coming back and looking for a team to sign with. Some wondered if he might be interested in playing with Austin Matthews. Of course, there's a lot of arguments that Kane's currently the greatest American-born player of all time. Matthews will certainly be considered that. At least it looks that way when he's done at this point or later in his career. At this point, it's a real possibility that they could make it work. That would probably mean that they don't get Bertuzzi back. I think it would probably have to boil down to one or the other. Now, of course, if they do end up trading Mitch Marner, on the other hand, that will give them, possibly, I should say, much more cap flexibility. The latest intel on Marner from a lot of the insiders are saying that it's a complicated trade. They don't know at this point if they're going to pull it off or not. They won't be shocked if he ends up staying because obviously he has full staying power because he has a no-move clause. He can control that situation and walk himself right out the door with no return to the Leafs this time next year if he chooses to do so, if they don't want to do a contract extension and keep that core group of players together. So we don't know what's going on with him. We don't know what's going on with Bertuzzi. We don't really know what's going on with Domi either, for that matter. They've got a bunch of contracts expiring on the blue line. Don't know what between the pipes. There's a lot of questions regarding this franchise for sure. And whether or not Kane would come in could be another one. But he could be a great fit there, and I have to wonder if that's something that I might be considering. So we'll see where things go. Let me know your thoughts if the Leafs should pursue Patrick Kane as a free agent. On another note, on the Ottawa Senators, the latest reports from the fourthperiod.com, as we've talked about, indicate that they've been one of the busiest teams in the trade market. They have their hand in a lot of conversations. And obviously, one of the things that they've been looking for is solid, steady goaltending. We talked a lot about the Markstrom rumors. That's been one of the main things out there regarding the Sens, but there is notes on the fourthperiod.com's most recent Sens update talking about that they've definitely reached out to the Bruins about Linus Ullmark. There's also mentions that they've talked to Nashville about UC Saros, and there's been some talk to the Minnesota Wild about returning and bringing back Philip Gustafsson. So clearly there's some, I guess, that are not sure if Jacob Markstrom would want to go to Ottawa because he would have to waive his no-move clause. We don't know how he feels about that. Some people think maybe he wouldn't want to. He might see other teams as being closer to being able to win, and maybe that's what he wants to try to do. I don't know. But at the end of the day, some of these guys have trade protection, and it's going to be up to them if they want to do that. Clearly, the Ottawa Senators are very motivated to get into the playoffs. They're very motivated to make the moves to get there, and goaltending is certainly going to be a huge part of that. So at the end of the day, no matter what they do here, they got to do something. And Ullmark's name has been out there a lot, but Gustafsson has been more of a newer type of name that we haven't heard until this past week. Really, if you take a look at how he's played in Minnesota this past couple of years, if they can play with that kind of consistency in Ottawa with a better decor in front of him, maybe this time around it could work a lot better. I mean, he knows what it's like there, very familiar. So, and whole new coaching staff, whole new ownership group, new manager, new everything. So I would think, not that he would have the protection, but I would think Gustafsson would be open to it anyway. So we will see where it goes, but could an old familiar face be the goalie that they end up targeting? We'll have to see where things go. Now, a Flames rumor I wanted to take a look at as well. I've actually seen this dating back one day last week, and I hadn't talked about it yet. And it may not be anything too significant, but I thought it was interesting nonetheless. TSN Calgary reporter Salim Valji was talking on a video, and I believe the video was, I didn't see it until, like I said, last week, a few days ago, but I believe it was near the end of April when he actually made the video. He was answering some questions from fans, and I believe he said that he believes that there's a really good chance that there's going to be an on-ice reunion in Calgary with the Flames this year with a player that the fans would be really, really happy with. And I believe he has a bet with some of the other Calgary media on whether or not it's going to happen. So obviously, he's a guy that would have some connections. A guy obviously that would have some intel. So wondering who could that be? There's actually, in looking through and kind of just doing some research, there's a lot of former Flames that could be available, either mostly through free agency, possibly through trade. I know, like looking at the free agent market, you're looking at a couple of older defensemen like Marc Giordano, TJ Brodie. I don't know if they'd be interested to bring back either one of those guys, but still they're both available, as the Leafs are not likely bringing back either of those guys. There's obviously Sean Monahan, currently with the Winnipeg Jets. Monahan, towards the end of his time in Calgary, the last year, two, or really almost two, was not healthy and was kind of looked upon as a player that they absolutely had to get rid of for cap purposes. They did so. He went to Montreal. He got his, had a big surgery. He's rehabbed. He's better. He's a lot better, and he's productive again. So, now he needs a new contract. Could he end up back in Calgary? That would be, I'm sure, a happy reunion for fans that really were fond of Monahan's time with the Flames. You got to wonder who else it could be. Could it be Chris Tanev? Tanev's also a former Flame, UFA. Now, of course, he was just recently moved. I can't see him going back as early as this offseason. I mean, they just literally traded him, so that's pretty unlikely. Lots to talk about Johnny Gaudreau. Now, again, he left as a free agent. Clearly didn't want to be there. So, to me, and not only that, based on how he left, and he kind of led them to think he was going to be signing back, and then all of a sudden goes to Columbus at the 11th hour. Now, things aren't working out in Columbus, and there's talk that Don Waddell, the new GM, has everything on the table, and is going to be talking to most of his team, even people who have no move clauses, to see how they feel about moving, because this team needs to get better in a hurry. They don't want to be rebuilding forever. And, it makes sense that he would talk to Johnny Gaudreau. Now, I don't see that happening, though. I think, again, that's less likely. So, so far we got Brodie, Giordano, Monahan, Tanev, Gaudreau that are all theoretically available. And really, I think the main one that makes sense is Monahan. To some degree, former captain Giordano. But, I mean, at his age, I think it was pretty clear now what we've seen in Toronto towards the end of his stretch there that he probably shouldn't be playing anymore. I think his time is up. Brodie, on the other hand, may be able to play in a reduced role. So, I don't know. It's tough to say, but I do wonder what he has for intel. He didn't want to say the player's name because he didn't want to go that far right now, but I do wonder if you've seen this video or if you have any thoughts on who it could be. Let me know down in the comments what player makes the most sense that could be a happy reunion on the ice in Calgary for the fan base to have something to smile about this fall. Now, also want to talk about Trevor Zegras to Montreal. Now, we've heard, I think it was about 7, 8, 9 days ago, we did a video talking about the asking price has been revealed for Zegras from general manager Pat Verbeek. That, and according to what we had heard from NHL insiders, that when their talks with Montreal, which were confirmed by a number of sources, that it was believed that they were looking for one of their top young defensemen as part of the package going back. That they wanted either Caden Goalie or defenseman David Reinbacher. Now, I talked about Caden Goalie probably being the preferred of the bunch because of the fact that he's a little bit more NHL proven. He's a little bit older, kind of fits their model, I think, just a bit better. But at the same time, Reinbacher was a very, top 5 pick, right shot defenseman, only, 1 year in after his draft year. Like, just there's still lots of there that teams would like and be interested in. But, for the most part, it seemed like a lot of fans were very much against moving Goalie. Now, I was listening to Stu Cowan, Montreal media member, on the podcast with Tony Marinaro. They were talking about this and saying how they believe the asking price was Goalie or Reinbacher. And would you make that trade? And if so, like, what would you be comfortable with either of these guys going in a trade for Zegras? And Stu Cowan's argument was he would move Reinbacher, but he would not move Goalie. And he thought Zegras would be a great fit in the Montreal top 6. Now, the rationale is quite simple. He sees Caden Goalie as a top pair defenseman. He sees Caden Goalie as, obviously, because of the amount of he's already got to play in the NHL, as a more proven commodity. So we already have a good idea of what Caden Goalie is and what he will become. Therefore, he really likes what that could be and doesn't want to move it. But with Reinbacher, he still sees him as being, yes, there's lots of potential, but he's still young, unproven, a little raw, and, maybe you take the chance. Doesn't see it being a scenario like, Sergachev for Drouin. Obviously they had another scenario where they traded a very young Ryan McDonough. That didn't work out very well for them either. Unfortunately, Montreal does have a history of trading top young defensemen, and they go on to other teams to have a ton of success. And you don't really want to see that, but as the player coming to you has a ton of success and it's good for both sides, it's not so bad. But in that Sergachev for Drouin deal, Drouin finally got his career back on track this year in Colorado, but as we know in Montreal, it was really tough for him. And I just think a lot of the everything that comes with playing at home and playing in that market, the pressure got to him. I think he struggled with a lot of stuff as much off the ice, mental health, all those things had a major impact on him, and it didn't work out. So now that he's in a different scenario, it seems to be getting better for him, which is great to see. But, the Habs don't want to see history repeat itself in that sense. So you get Reinbacher, who's, like I said, a top 5 pick. Looks like a really good defensive prospect. He's a right shot, which is a little bit harder to find as well. The other thing I have to wonder is where they're picking this year in the draft. They've got a pretty high pick, right? So a lot of speculation over who they're going to take at number 5. Would it be Caden Lindstrom? Some talk about a Ginla, or they probably don't need a defenseman because they have so many. But maybe they really like a defenseman. What if there was a D-man there that you liked better than Reinbacher? Would you move Reinbacher to get Zegras so you get a top young forward, and then you get another defenseman to replace Reinbacher in your prospect pool? Maybe you take Zane Parekh, who's a really good right shot defenseman. Or maybe you really like the size that Sam Dickinson brings, or Siliev, or any of those guys, depending on who's on the board. They do have a lot of D, and even if you trade one, doesn't mean you have to take one to replace them, because they could still really load up in the forward group and still be good on the back end as well because of all the other pieces they already have there. So if they trade for Zegras and they draft Lindstrom or Ginla or one of those other top forwards with their first round pick, you're getting 2 big pieces coming to the forward group. You subtracted what could have been a big piece in the back end, but you still have lots there to build on. So what's the best course of action here? Do you move Reinbacher for Zegras if that's the asking price? And if you do that and you do it ahead of time, do you then change course with your draft pick in the first round this year? Let me know what you think down in the comments, and we'll discuss further. Lots of interesting D-men there on the table that they could easily replace Reinbacher with and still get Zegras if they make that move. But is that worth the risk? Do they become a better team now and into the future? Let me know everybody's thoughts down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.